Welcome back to Bud Not Buddy, Chapter 7. We're going to pick up in the middle of this chapter, in the middle of page 57. I'm going to back up just a little bit. Our focus for these last couple of pages in the chapter is making sure you're really understanding what's happening here. I said, and she moved all the way to Chicago? That's right, but Chicago isn't that far. Here, I'll show you. She reached under her desk and pulled out a thick leather book called Atlas of the United States of America. An atlas is a book of maps. She thumbed through a couple of pages and said, "Here we are." She turned the book to me. It was a big map of Michigan and a couple of the states that were next to it. "We're here," she pointed to a spot that said Flint, "and Chicago is here in Illinois." They looked pretty close, but I know how tricky maps can be. Shucks, they put the whole world on one page on a map. So I said, how long would it take someone to walk that far? So here's a map showing the distance from Flint to Chicago. And you can see there, here's Champaign. Indianapolis is kind of under that little sign there. So if you know anything about this area, you can kind of imagine, if you've ever gone from Champaign to Chicago, for example, that can help you imagine how long the distance is. Going back to the bottom of page 57. She said, "Oh dear, quite a while, I'm afraid. Let's check the distance." She reached under the desk and pulled out another thick book called Standard Highway Mileage Guide and turned to a page that had a million numbers and city names on it. She showed me how to find Chicago on the line that was running across the page and Flint on the line that was running down the page, and then to look at the number that was writ where the two of them joined up. It said 270. She pulled a pencil out and said, "Okay, this is how one figures the amount of time required to walk to Chicago. Now," she pulled a third book out. Shucks, this is one of the bad things about talking to librarians. I asked one question, and already she had us digging through 3 different books. She thumbed through the book until she said, "Aha! It says here that the average male human gait is 5 miles an hour. Okay, assuming that you could cover 5 miles an hour, all we have to do is divide 270 by 5. She did it and said, 54 hours. Much too long to be practical. No, I'm afraid you'll simply have to wait until Mrs. Rollins comes back to Flint for a visit. Shucks. Chicago might as well be a million miles away from Flint, and Miss Hill might as well be a squashed, crunched up mess in a washing machine when it came down to helping me now." Wait a minute. Didn't the librarian say Mrs. Rollins? I'm going to reread that section and monitor and make sure I'm understanding. She did it and said, 54 hours. Much too long to be practical. No, I'm afraid you'll simply have to wait until Mrs. Rollins comes back to Flint for a visit. Well, I know that Mrs. is a title for a married woman, and she was Miss Hill. Miss means somebody is unmarried. So Mrs. Rollins must be the new name of Miss Hill. That helps me make sure I'm understanding what's going on here. They didn't just all of a sudden throw in a new character named Mrs. Rollins. Okay, back to the bottom of the page. I thanked the librarian for the bad news and went to sit at one of the big heavy tables so I could think what to do next. Going back to the home was out. It used to be that we'd get a new kid every once in a while, but lately it seems like there's a couple of new kids every day, mostly babies, and they're most always sick. It's not like it was when I first got there. Shucks, half the folks that run it don't even tell you their name and don't remember yours unless you're in trouble all the time or getting ready to move out. After a while, I got my suitcase and walked into the regular air and stinking smells of Flint. That library door closing after I walked out was the exact kind of door Mama had told me about. I knew that since it had closed, the next one was about to open. I went back under my tree, and before I knew it, I was asleep. So that's the end of the chapter. Now, for your writing in this section, I want you to write what you think Bud is going to do next. We know he can't go back to the home. He's probably not going to go back to the Amos's. Miss Hill is gone. Write what you think Bud will do next.